Hello. Little sunburn from being on the farm today. I have been questioned many times why I've, spent so much time of my life trying to uncover some of the fundamental secrets of the universe, because it doesn't make you money and it doesn't do anything for you that conventional people, meaning most people, find important to spend their time doing. It's certainly not like having a family and kids and stuff, and it's not like saving up for a big vacation. There is a fundamental bliss to those few of us, and I think there's few, that comes from understanding. And of course, wisdom is its own reward. But this, of course, is something a little bit divergent from wisdom, but there must necessitatively, as the Greeks would use the word ananke, which doesn't really mean necessity. What it means is it can't exist any other way. Necessitatively, the universe must follow something so incredibly simple that it's hiding right underneath our noses. There's a new article from a science journal, and I'll post the link to the article below. You can read it. It's not that big. And as I've said many countless times, and this is an undeniable fact, there's only ever been two postulates for the fundamental nature of reality. One's been atomism, and the other one has been the ether. Neither Michelson, Morley, actually they gave more validity to the ether than they did in denying it if you actually delve into the facts of the matter. Neither them nor anybody else has ever disproven the ether, and it's completely impossible. And you can't replace it with an impossible system like atomism. Wireless power induction, light speeding back up after it leaves the medium. Of course, light's not an emission and nothing's actually traveling, but that's a matter for another discussion. There are countless thousands of things that are completely impossible to explain from the standpoint of conventional science, and I can't stand how the word science is used, like the Catholic Church, like a papal bull or an edict from the Pope. Science. It's like, whatever. Well, this is science. It's like, and when someone says that, what they're saying is you can't question it. There's so many things in science that were believed to be true depending on what era that you were in for centuries or sometimes decades. Science! Well, it turns out it's not true. And I can assure you with 100% certainty that relativity, and this is not my opinion, this is a fact, more of relativity is actually highly questioned now than it ever has been. In other words, more and more of relativity has been refuted than it is a substantiation thereof. But that's also too matter for another discussion. The only person that Nikola Tesla himself railed against was Einstein. And everything that we think, and this is a fact, there have been 4 books written about how Einstein plagiarized all his stuff, was actually stolen from a few people, but primarily from a person named Henri Poincaré, a very, very brilliant, genuine scientist from whom Einstein stole much of his stuff. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. You can actually look at the prior works of Henri Poincaré. It's like, wow, where have I heard this before? It's like, oh, this is attributed to Einstein. But anyway, getting onto this article, it's about electromagnetism. And once again, you really have to approach it, and I love making things simple. You have to approach the ultimate undeniable reality. There's not a single person on this earth, PhD or otherwise, that can refute this because it's irrefutable. Only ever been 2 postulates for reality. One's atomism, the other one's the ether. This is 100% undeniable. So if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. If you're an atomist, then everything is a particle. Everything's a particle explanation. Or a materialistic explanation, however. And the article says that electromagnetism is a property of space-time itself, study finds. And I'd like to read you a couple passages from this article. What it does, and this is what relativity does, and this is what these atomists and these folks in quantum do, is that they use space-time, which is not a thing in and of itself. When I say space-time, I like to make things reducible such that people can understand it without getting into, complexities that confound and make people's eyes glaze over. We're actually talking about space-time. I could say something if I were talking as a psychologist, and I can't stand psychology, nor do I love psychologists, if I'm as pretending to be a psychologist, if I were to say something like, instead of space-time, using a frame of reference as a psychologist, talk about happiness, depression. What if I said happiness or not happiness, depression, well, happiness, laughter. Happiness, laughter. Well, these are concepts. These are not things in and of themselves. I mean, someone is either laughing or they're happy or both. But I mean, if I said something like that, I mean, any moderately intelligent person, like, well, what are you talking about? Who is happy and who is laughing? It's like, no, these things, you know, they act upon other things, and which is true. You know, if someone's happy, they'll act upon. Now, we're talking about something is concrete, because science must fundamentally be rational and realistic, but these people actually use concepts to try to explain other concepts. So the notion of space-time is a complete misnomer, is what I'm pointing to. Time is not a thing at all. And this is, also too, not my opinion. This is what the ancient Greeks and Indians said. Well, we've progressed from those old guys. You know, that's old stuff. We know better now. We have relative. Well, that's not true. The most intelligent things ever written in all of modern science is based upon Platonic and Aristotelian logic and methodology. These people, I don't know how much you've read of ancient Platonism or Neoplatonism vis-a-vis like Plotinus, Proclus, Numenius, Syrianus, Iamblichus, but these people, even if you're the smartest person on earth, I kid you not, their writings will bend your brain. They were so intelligent. These people really, really, really did. And I just mentioned a few of them, and there's more than a few like that. They really did know a lot. And these people logically and intelligently did say that time is not a thing. It is a measure of magnitudes. There's no such thing as time. Time exists conventionally, but it does not exist ultimately at all. And space has no properties. Now, if any of you out there think that you're smarter than Nikola Tesla, or that Einstein, who stole much of his stuff from Henri Poincaré, is smarter than Tesla, well, I'll leave it at that. Let's get on some Tesla quotes here in a second about that, which I've given before many times. But let's read this article just a little bit. In the 19th century, scholars thought that electromagnetic waves must propagate in some sort, let's get to that in a second, in some sort of elusive medium, which they called the ether. Later, the ether hypothesis was abandoned, and to this day, classical theory of electromagnetism does not provide us with a. This is the important point. This is a logical and intelligent admission. Today's theory of electromagnetism does not provide us with a clear answer as to the question in which medium electrical and magnetic fields propagate in a vacuum. Because, and I mentioned this before, and it's really one of a million ways you could stump these atomists. I'm a PhD professor of theoretical physics. Oh, really? Yeah. How does wireless power, is charge and discharge the movement of electrons? Yes, it is, movement of electrons. How does wireless power induction work in a vacuum? Well, there's fields of force. Fields of force. Yes, exactly right. Lines of force. Yes, fields of influence. Well, no branch of science has ever defined a field. They never have. And force is not a thing. Force is hardly different than time. Force is done by something upon something else. Yes, force of what, by what, and upon what. There's no such thing as force itself. Force is not a thing. Force is an attribute of something done by something else upon something else. It is influence. Influence of what, by what, and how? How can you have influence? Now, if I punch myself in the face here, that's obviously physical contact, so there's obviously direct, but you can't explain wireless power induction. You can't explain magnetic. These people try to, since everything to them is atoms. They say, well, what's emitting out of a magnet is virtual photons, virtual particles. That's their admission. But of course, there's absolutely no evidence for this. It's completely absurd. It's irrational and it's illogical. Physics must fundamentally be rational and certainly has to be realistic and logical. But so in this article it says, you know, must propagate in some sort of elusive medium, electromagnetic waves. Waves of what? Okay, electromagnetism, right? But waves of what? By what? And we're not talking about mechanical waves here. I've been attacked by another person. So you're confusing mechanical waves for electromagnetic waves. Yeah, but you can't explain electromagnetism either because it's not a thing. It's not a particle. Sure it is. No, it's not. Well, they're fields of force. Force of what, by what, and upon what. You can't define a field. None of these people have ever defined a field. I've defined a field in simple such that any child could understand. What's a field? Well, little Johnny, a field is an ether perturbation modality. And little Johnny, of course, since he's only like 12 years old, was like, what does that mean? It's like, well, Johnny, a field is like this. You know, fundamentally the ether would be like water. However, don't take that analogy too far. And these different fields, which we give different names to, are just different modalities of water. You know what ice and steam are, right? Yes, yes, yes. Little Johnny's seen ice and steam. Well, ice and steam are just water, Johnny. They're just different temperature and pressure modalities of water. So human beings give names to these things, which are all one and the same thing. Little Johnny understands. Because if you can't explain it to a child or someone with a simple mind, then you fundamentally don't understand it. And by the way, like a broken clock is right twice a day. That's something Einstein said. Einstein says if you can't explain something simply to a barmaid, then you don't understand it. And that, of course, he was right on, just like the broken clock being right twice a day. So, what are you talking about in this article about propagating in the ether? It's not propagating in the, because these people, they have thought this since day one. This is not just one article written by one person. They all think like this. They say, well, if we go with the ether model, you know, there's something, the electromagnetic waves are propagating in the ether, kind of like I'm swimming in the water. Well, the electromagnetism is not something and something else. The electromagnetism is that thing itself. It is a modality. It's specific electromagnetic as a coaxial circuit. In the case of light, for example, it is not one thing and another, because that's what this article says, but they all do think like that. Electromagnetic waves must propagate in some sort of elusive medium. You know, like a swimmer in the water. It's propagating in the water. Here we have electromagnetism. It's propagating in the ether. No! The electromagnetism is the ether. Hello, McFly. It's literally that simple. As I've humorously said, Mother Nature is a dreadlock-wearing, hemp-skirt, muddy feet chick. It is that simple. These people confound and conflate and confuse everything. This is, by the way, exactly what Nikola Tesla meant when he talked about scientists. They could think deeply but not clearly. And Tesla goes on to say, you must be sane to think clearly. These people think deeply, but they're insane. They come up with brilliant, deep thinking, but they're insane. Everything they say and think is irrational. It's illogical. It breaks the back of Occam's razor. It breaks the back of simplex logic and common sense. So, it's not propagating in the ether. It is the ether itself. Also, too, they think gravity is a force. Well, gravity is not a force. Gravity is the opposite of a force. Masses are never accelerating towards one another, rather towards a low pressure point between both. And here's an important statement I'm about to make, and it's my statement, and I'm going to say it twice because it's that important. Space itself is this. It's an ether rarefaction. Yes? It's low pressure. Ether rarefaction. I don't know if you know what rarefaction means, but you can look it up. Ether rarefaction. Yeah? Kind of like a vacuum, right? You know, nature abhors a vacuum. Well, space itself is an ether vacuum. It's not a total vacuum, but it's an ether rarefaction. It's the mirage of infinity. As I've said many countless times, space itself is the after effect of a divergent magnetic field. A magnetic field, of course, is a three-dimensional force vector. The loss of energy or inertia, i.e. defining the dielectric, manifests as the toroidal geometry that is magnetism, literally the three-dimensional S-curve that gives volume and magnitude to everything in the universe. People say, why are you so interested in magnetism? Well, everything in the universe that has mass and magnitude has it for only one reason, magnetism and magnetism alone. Oh. So the article goes on to say, which is really ridiculous, what they do is they put space-time. By the way, these people can never ever deny the ether. What they do is the ether to them is like invoking, you know, the lost secret of, the lost name of Beelzebub. You know, not, you know, if Beelzebub has a secret name or something, you can't use the word ether. That's literally almost how these people think. They replace it with different things because you can never deny the ether. You must replace it with something else. They replace it with magic words that are allowed and permissible in the quantum, I call it the cult of bumping particles. And I'll read the article here and show you what they replace the ether with. Space-time. In a way, space-time itself is therefore the ether. That's what this article says. Just came out. Yeah. In a way, space-time itself is therefore the ether. Electric and magnetic fields represent certain local tensors or twists in the fabric of space-time. Well, there's no such thing as space-time. Now, we all grew up with the science fiction BS, you know, Star Trek, Star Wars, yada, 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 yada. Curving space-time, Captain. We're going to enter the wormhole where space-time is curved to infinity. Well, time is not a thing that could be curved any more than you could bend unicorn farts. Time is not a thing. It's a measure. And space has no properties. Let me quote you from Nikola Tesla. But maybe you think you or Einstein is smarter than Tesla, and of course you would be wrong. To say that in the presence of large bodies, space becomes curved is equivalent to stating that something can act upon nothing. I, for one, refuse to subscribe to such a nonsense view. Relativity is a beggar wrapped in purple clothes, meaning purple of nobility, for whom ignorant people take as a king. This theory, says Tesla, wraps all sorts of errors and fallacies and clothes them in mathematical, magnificent garb, which fascinates and dazzles many people who are blind to its underlying errors. This theory is like a beggar dressed in purple clothes, for whom the ignorant people take for a king. This Einstein's theory of explanation of natural phenomena. Theory of relativity is a mass of errors and deception whose ideas are violently opposed to the teachings of great men of science of the past and even to common sense itself. He also, too, called Einstein a fuzzy-haired crackpot. The reason why he called Einstein a fuzzy-haired crackpot was many reasons, but the one time in Nikola Tesla's life that we have evidence for him fuming at the mouth, not literally fuming at the mouth, is the notion that space has properties and it can be bent, kind of like you're bending something. We're going to bend space-time. Well, space is not a thing to be bent. Space is a thing to be erased. Space is a rarefaction of the ether. And just as you could actually see underneath the supercell, which of course I've known this my entire life, that these people of quantum and current views of science, of space-time conceptual reification is complete nonsense. They're actually never, of course, accelerating. And it's not a force, too, just as there's no such thing as magnetic attraction, which is completely ludicrous. It's completely ludicrous, as I've explained 1,000 times. They're actually accelerating towards a null pressure point between the two. That null pressure point is the lowest pressure dissipation of the ether rarefaction that is space, and this is the reason why. It's non-point source mutual mass acceleration of masses itself. In other words, it's electrostatic torsion or dielectric torsion, where they're accelerating towards counter space, because that's what space is. Space is ether rarefaction. I don't care if you believe me on what I just said about ether rarefaction regarding space. However, it's undeniable and explains all phenomena. But the notion of curved space-time has no basis in reality. It's completely ludicrous. It's completely opposite, not OPP, the other opposite. It's opposite to facts, logic, wisdom. It's opposite to everything, of course, being magnetic and dielectric, or some people, the EU, would call everything's electrical. Of course, electricity is a compound of dielectricity and magnetism. But there's no such thing as curved space-time. This is completely ludicrous. These people who can never in no way deny the ether have supplanted the ether with space-time. Because they say as much. In a way, space-time itself, therefore, is the ether. They can't say the word ether. I mean, they can in this article, but that is literally, and I do mean this seriously and not jokingly, in current science, which is materialistic and illogical, contrary to Mother Nature, the ether is the great evil word which shall not be uttered. You could say quantum foam, you could say curved space-time, you could say zero-point energy, but you can't say ether. And what I just said, it's slightly funny, but I don't mean it jokingly. I've been studying these people for decades. I know all their fallacies, all their illogical nonsense, the stuff that they tell themselves and tell one another. It's illogical. It doesn't paint an accurate or even sensible picture of Mother Nature. Nikola Tesla never agreed with it, but maybe you think you're smarter than Nikola Tesla. Or that Einstein, well, that's old stuff, Tesla knew certain amount, because I've heard this before. Tesla knew just a little bit, he's a really smart guy, invented a lot of stuff, but, we've since have a better understanding of reality with relativity. Far less of relativity is believed or affirmed now than it was a decade ago, and a decade before that. In other words, the increasing viability, and it is only a theory, but that theory does not have increasing viability or proof. It has decreasing viability, and that's not my opinion, that's a fact. Relativity has decreasing viability and proof. Because it's inaccurate. You can't explain a field with it. You can't explain endless things. Because space-time has no basis in reality. There's no such thing as space-time. Time does exist conventionally as a measure of magnitudes and their passing, but time is not a thing that acts upon other things. It is not a thing itself. Neither is space. Tesla said many times, space has no properties. It cannot do things to other things. Space is not an agent. It is exactly like a shadow. Space doesn't exist ultimately, and time is only a measure. So the notion of curved space-time, I have humorously said, is like talking about bending unicorn farts. We're talking about bending things that don't even exist. It's not rational. It's not even realistic. It's not even sensible to even, I mean, am I one of the few remaining, sensible people on Earth? I know I'm not. I'm not trying to puff myself up like that, but I mean, the fact that people believe this stuff, curved space-time, all you've done is you've taken the ether and you replaced it with something that doesn't exist at all. Space-time! Space isn't a field. And time doesn't even exist. That's to say that bodies are change their vectors of acceleration out in the cosmos is due to space-time is no different than saying that Thor laid down his hammer and changed the movement of heavenly bodies. I mean, of course, that's what ancient people thought. They thought all sorts of crazy stuff like. Ra moved the sun. We've replaced one absurdity with another absurdity. Instead of Ra and Thor's hammer, we now got space-time. Well, space-time's not rational, and it's not realistic. It violates Occam's razor. You're reifying these concepts which don't exist. There's no such thing as curved space-time. But maybe you think you're smarter than Nikola Tesla. Maybe you do. I've known literally for decades the notion of curved space-time, even though it permeates all our science fiction movies. This is a ludicrous absurdity. Anyway, I digress too far. Apologies. Thank you so much for watching, and ask a PhD physicist to define the term a field. See how far you get. Good night.